The crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the grand ballroom, as Victoria Sterling balanced yet another tray of champagne glasses. Her feet ached in the borrowed heels, and the black server's uniform felt stiff against her skin, but she forced a professional smile as she navigated through the crowd of elegantly dressed guests. The annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala was in full swing, and the city's elite had gathered in their finest attire to see and be seen while writing tax-deductible checks. Victoria had been working since 6 that morning, first at the coffee shop downtown, then rushing to her afternoon shift at the bookstore. And now here, serving champagne to people who spent more on a single piece of jewelry than she made in 6 months. The exhaustion was beginning to show, but she couldn't afford to lose this catering job. Her mother's medical bills were mounting, and every dollar counted. Champagne? She offered to a group of women discussing their recent trips to Paris. They barely acknowledged her presence as they took glasses from her tray, their conversation continuing without pause. Victoria had grown accustomed to being invisible in these circles. Just another service worker fading into the background of their glittering world. Across the room, Gabriel Whitmore stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his tailored black tuxedo fitting him perfectly as he gazed out at the city lights below. At 34, he had built Whitmore Industries from a small tech startup into a billion-dollar empire. But success had come with its own set of chains. These social obligations felt more like performances than genuine charitable efforts, and he found himself increasingly disconnected from the shallow conversations and calculated networking that filled these events. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," Diana Chen observed as she approached with 2 glasses of whiskey, his business partner, and one of his few genuine friends. Diana had known Gabriel since their college days and could read his moods. Better than anyone, Gabriel accepted the glass gratefully. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who knows you well enough to see past the polished exterior," Diana replied with a knowing smile. "These things are necessary evils, you know? The hospital really does benefit from the donations." "I know," Gabriel sighed, taking a sip of the aged whiskey. "I just feel like we're all playing roles in some elaborate theater production. Everyone's here to be seen doing good rather than actually caring about the cause." Diana studied her friend's profile, noting the weariness in his dark eyes. Gabriel had achieved everything most people could only dream of, but she knew the cost of his success. His personal relationships had suffered, and despite being surrounded by people who wanted something from him, he was profoundly lonely. "Maybe you need to step outside your usual circle," Diana suggested gently. "Not everyone in this world is motivated by appearances and profit margins." Before Gabriel could respond, a commotion near the serving station caught his attention. A young woman in server's attire was being berated by an older gentleman whose shirt bore an obvious wine stain. Her face was flushed with embarrassment as she apologized repeatedly, offering to have his clothes cleaned. "This is a $5,000 shirt," the man was saying loudly enough for nearby guests to turn and stare. "Your clumsiness is going to cost more than you make in a month." Gabriel felt his jaw tighten as he watched the scene unfold. The woman's hands were trembling as she tried to clean the stain with a napkin, her mortification evident in every gesture. Without thinking, he began walking toward them, Diana following curiously behind. "Actually, Harold," Gabriel said as he approached, his voice carrying the quiet authority that commanded boardrooms, "accidents happen to everyone. I'm sure your insurance covers cleaning costs." Harold Pemberton, a city councilman who had been trying to secure Gabriel's support for various projects, immediately changed his tone. "Gabriel, of course, you're absolutely right. I was just startled, that's all." Gabriel's attention, however, had shifted entirely to the young woman who was still staring at the stained shirt with obvious distress. Up close, he could see that she was beautiful in a natural, unadorned way that was rare in his social circle. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her green eyes held a depth that spoke of experiences far removed from the superficial world of the ballroom. "Please don't worry about it," Gabriel said gently, addressing her directly. "These things happen." Victoria looked up at him, expecting to see the same condescension she had grown accustomed to from the wealthy patrons she served. Instead, she found herself looking into warm brown eyes that held genuine kindness. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that showed just a touch of silver at the temples. There was something about his presence that commanded attention without demanding it. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can pay for the cleaning or replacement if necessary." "Absolutely not," Gabriel replied firmly. "Harold, you'll send the cleaning bill to my office if there is one, which I doubt there will be." His tone left no room for argument, and the councilman nodded quickly before melting back into the crowd. Victoria found herself alone with this stranger who had just rescued her from what could have been a very expensive mistake. "Thank you," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "That was very kind of you." "I'm Gabriel," he said, extending his hand. When she took it, he noticed how cold her fingers were despite the warmth of the crowded ballroom. "Victoria," she replied, surprised by the firm but gentle way he shook her hand. Most of the wealthy guests barely acknowledged her existence, let alone treated her as an equal. "Are you all right?" Gabriel asked, noting the pallor of her skin and the slight tremor in her voice. "You look like you might need to sit down." Victoria tried to dismiss his concern with a wave of her hand, but the gesture made her realize how shaky she felt. She had been running on adrenaline and caffeine for days, grabbing only a few hours of sleep between her various jobs. The stress of her mother's deteriorating condition, combined with her financial struggles, was taking its toll. "I'm fine," she insisted, but as she spoke, the room seemed to tilt slightly around her. The sounds of the party became muffled. She felt a familiar, light-headed sensation that she had been ignoring for weeks. Gabriel saw the moment her composure began to crack. Her face went from pale to ashen, and her eyes lost focus. He stepped closer instinctively, just as Victoria's knees began to buckle. "I don't feel very well," she whispered. Reaching out blindly for support, Gabriel caught her as she began to fall, his arms encircling her waist and pulling her against his chest. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through him, not just from the physical closeness, but from the vulnerability she displayed in that moment. Here was someone who worked herself to exhaustion serving others, who worried about paying for a stranger's shirt, who apologized even as she collapsed from fatigue. Diana Gabriel called to his friend, who had witnessed the entire exchange. "Can you find somewhere quiet where she can rest?" Diana nodded immediately, recognizing the protective tone in Gabriel's voice. She had never seen him react this way to anyone, let alone a woman he had just met. "There's a private lounge just off the main hallway," she said, leading the way. Gabriel lifted Victoria easily, carrying her toward the exit as concerned murmurs rippled through the nearby guests. She felt surprisingly light in his arms, and he could smell the faint scent of vanilla in her hair. Despite her obvious exhaustion, there was something about her that drew him in. A genuineness that he hadn't encountered in years of moving through high society circles. The private lounge was elegantly furnished with comfortable sofas and soft lighting. Gabriel settled Victoria gently on one of the couches, kneeling beside her as Diana fetched a glass of water and some crackers from the catering station. "I'm so embarrassed," Victoria said weakly as she slowly regained her composure. "This is completely unprofessional." "When was the last time you ate something substantial?" Gabriel asked, ignoring her self-recriminations. Victoria tried to remember, realizing that she had grabbed a piece of toast that morning before rushing to her first job. "I had breakfast," she said unconvincingly. "That's not what I asked," Gabriel replied gently but firmly. He'd built his business empire by reading people, and everything about Victoria's appearance and behavior suggested someone who was pushing herself far beyond her limits. Diana returned with refreshments and a damp cloth. "Here, this might help," she said, offering the cloth to Victoria for her forehead, as Victoria slowly sipped the water and nibbled on a cracker. Gabriel found himself studying her profile. There was an elegance to her features that had nothing to do with expensive makeup or styling. She was naturally beautiful, but more than that. There was something in her demeanor that spoke of strength and determination. This was someone who faced challenges head-on, even when those challenges were overwhelming her. "Do you mind me asking why you're working yourself into the ground?" Gabriel asked quietly. Victoria hesitated, unused to personal questions from the people she served. But something about Gabriel's manner invited honesty. "My mother is sick," she said simply. "The medical bills are pretty overwhelming, so I work as many jobs as I can manage." The simple statement hit Gabriel harder than any sob story could have. There was no self-pity in her voice, no request for sympathy or assistance. She was simply stating facts, explaining why she pushed herself to the point of collapse without complaint. "What kind of work do you normally do?" Diana asked gently, settling into a nearby chair. "I'm actually an artist," Victoria said, her face brightening slightly for the first time that evening. "At least I try to be. I paint when I have time. Though that's not very often lately. The gallery work and restaurant jobs pay the bills." Gabriel felt something shift inside his chest. Here was someone with passion and dreams who was sacrificing her own aspirations to care for someone she loved.
Oh.
It was a kind of nobility that his world rarely encountered, where most people were focused on advancing their own interests at any cost. "What kind of art do you create?" he found himself asking, genuinely curious. Victoria's entire demeanor changed as she talked about her painting. Her eyes lit up, and her voice gained strength as she described her love for capturing human emotions in portraiture. Gabriel found himself captivated by her enthusiasm. The way she gestured as she spoke, the passion that transformed her tired features into something radiant. "I'd love to see your work sometime," Gabriel said, surprising himself with the intensity of his interest. Victoria looked at him with wonder, as if the idea that someone like him would care about her art was incomprehensible. "Really? Really?" Gabriel confirmed, meaning it completely. Diana watched this exchange with growing fascination. She had seen Gabriel navigate countless social and business interactions with practiced ease, but she had never seen him display genuine personal interest in someone he had just met. There was something happening here that went beyond mere politeness or charity. As Victoria's color returned and she seemed steadier, she began to insist that she needed to return to work. "I can't afford to lose this job," she explained apologetically. "Nonsense," Gabriel said firmly. "You're in no condition to be carrying heavy trays and navigating crowds." "I'll speak to the catering manager." "Please don't," Victoria said quickly, panic flashing in her eyes. "I need this work." Gabriel saw the fear in her expression and realized that his intervention, however well-intentioned, could actually make her situation worse. "Then let me walk you back," he offered instead. "Make sure you're steady on your feet." As they made their way back toward the ballroom, Gabriel found himself reluctant to let Victoria disappear back into the crowd of servers. Something significant had happened in that quiet lounge, a connection that he hadn't felt in years. The protective instinct she had awakened in him was unlike anything he had experienced. "Victoria," he said as they reached the edge of the party, "would you allow me to check on you tomorrow? Make sure you're feeling better?" She looked at him with surprise and something that might have been hope. "Why would you want to do that?" Gabriel considered his answer carefully. "'Cause tonight, when you collapsed in my arms, something changed for me. I can't explain it, but I know I don't want this to be the last time we talk." Victoria stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. What she found instead was an honesty that took her breath away. This man, who could have anyone and anything he wanted, was standing before her asking permission to see her again. "I work at Morrison's Cafe on 5th Street, she said quietly. "I'm there most afternoons." Gabriel smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "Then I'll see you tomorrow afternoon." As Victoria returned to her duties, and Gabriel rejoined the party. Both carried with them the knowledge that something extraordinary had begun. Diana watched her friend throughout the rest of the evening, noting how his attention kept drifting toward the server's station. How he seemed distracted by thoughts of the young woman who had literally fallen into his life. The collision had been accidental, but the connection it created would prove to be anything but coincidental. In a world of calculated relationships and strategic alliances, Gabriel had found something real. And Victoria, who had spent so long taking care of everyone else, had encountered someone who wanted to take care of her. The evening ended with both of them lying awake in their respective homes, replaying every moment of their unexpected encounter, neither knowing that their lives had just taken a turn that would change everything. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows of Morrison's Cafe, casting golden rectangles across the worn wooden floors. Victoria wiped down tables with practiced efficiency, her movements more energetic than they had been in weeks. She had actually slept for 8 full hours the night before, something that hadn't happened since her mother's diagnosis 3 months ago. Every few minutes her eyes drifted toward the front door, though she tried to convince herself that Gabriel Whitmore wouldn't actually show up. Men like him didn't visit neighborhood cafes to check on exhausted waitresses. The previous evening felt almost dreamlike now, in the harsh light of day and the familiar routine of her regular job. Perhaps his concern had been nothing more than polite charity. It's the kind of gesture wealthy people made to feel better about themselves. The bell above the door chimed, and Victoria looked up from the espresso machine she was cleaning. Her breath caught as Gabriel walked in, looking somehow even more handsome in casual clothes than he had in his formal tuxedo. He wore dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt, but the expensive fabric and perfect fit marked him as clearly out of place. "In the modest cafe, Victoria," he said, his face lighting up with a smile that made her heart skip. "How are you feeling today?" Several customers turned to look at the interaction, and Victoria became acutely aware of her simple uniform and the coffee stains on her apron. "Much better, thank you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Can I get you something too?" "Drink." Gabriel approached the counter, studying the handwritten menu board. "What do you recommend?" "The Colombian roast is excellent," Victoria said, falling into the familiar rhythm of customer service. "And Emma, the owner, makes incredible pastries." "Then I'll have the Colombian black and whatever pastry you think I should try." As Victoria prepared his order, Gabriel found himself watching her every movement. There was a grace to the way. She worked a competence that spoke of someone who took pride in doing things well, regardless of how simple the task might be. Her auburn hair caught the afternoon light, and when she smiled at him, he felt that same jolt of connection he had experienced the night before. "Here you are," Victoria said, sliding a steaming mug and a plate with a flaky croissant across the counter. "That'll be $4.50. Gabriel handed her a $20 bill. "Keep the change." "That's way too much," Victoria protested, reaching for the register to make change. "Consider it a thank you for the recommendation," Gabriel said gently, closing his hand over hers to stop her from opening the cash drawer. The contact sent electricity up Victoria's arm. She looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "I was hoping we could talk," Gabriel said quietly. "When you have a break." Victoria glanced around the cafe, noting that the afternoon rush was still an hour away. "I suppose I could take a few minutes," she said, untying her apron with trembling fingers. They chose a small table near the window, and Gabriel was struck by how different Victoria looked in natural light. The exhaustion that had marked her features the night before was mostly gone, replaced by a vitality that made her green eyes sparkle. She was even more beautiful than he had remembered, but it was more than her physical appearance that drew him in. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," Gabriel said, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "Last night you seemed like I was about to collapse." Victoria finished with a rueful smile. "Because I was. I haven't been taking very good care of myself lately." "Your mother," Gabriel said gently. "You mentioned she was sick." Victoria's expression grew somber. "Multiple sclerosis. The treatments are expensive and she can't work anymore. My father does construction, but the medical bills are more than he can handle alone." Gabriel felt his chest tighten at the matter-of-fact way she described her family's struggle. There was no bitterness in her voice, no resentment about the sacrifices she was making. She was simply doing what needed to be done. "What about your art?" he asked. "You said you were a painter." Victoria's face brightened slightly. "I am, though I don't have much time for it these days. I have a small studio space in my apartment. But between the 3 jobs, I'm lucky if I can paint for an hour a week." "3 jobs?" Gabriel repeated. His admiration for her growing. "The coffee shop, the bookstore, and catering when I can get it," Victoria confirmed. "It's not forever. Once Mom's condition stabilizes and we get a better handle on the medical costs, I'll be able to focus more." "On my art," Gabriel found himself leaning forward, captivated by her quiet strength. "What kind of art do you create?" "Portraits, mostly," Victoria said, her voice gaining enthusiasm. "I love trying to capture the essence of a person, not just what they look like, but who they are underneath. The stories their faces tell. Love to see your work, Gabriel," said, meaning it completely. Victoria studied his face, looking for any sign of condescension or polite insincerity. What she found instead was genuine interest, a warmth in his dark eyes that made her believe he truly cared about her answer. "Why?" she asked quietly. I mean, you must know dozens of artists, famous ones with gallery showings and collectors. Gabriel considered his answer carefully, because those artists paint for people like me, people who buy art as investments, or status symbols. You paint because you have something to say. That's much rarer than you might think. The sincerity in his voice made Victoria's heart race. She had spent so long around people who saw her as nothing more than the person serving their coffee or taking their order. To have someone like Gabriel speak to her as if her dreams mattered was overwhelming. "I have some pieces at home," she said hesitantly. "Nothing professional, just personal work. Could I see them sometime?" Gabriel asked, his voice gentle but hopeful. Victoria felt a flutter of panic. Her apartment was tiny, cramped, and showed every sign of their financial struggles. The idea of Gabriel Whitmore in her living space seemed surreal. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "Why not?" Victoria gestured vaguely around the modest cafe. "This isn't your world. My apartment, my life, it's all very different from what you're used to." Gabriel leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "Victoria, can I tell you something?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Last night was the first time in years that I felt like I was having a real conversation with someone. It's not a business negotiation, not a social performance, just two people talking honestly. That's worth more to me than any expensive restaurant or exclusive gallery." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She had spent so long feeling invisible, believing that her struggles made her somehow less than the people she served, that the idea of someone valuing her authenticity was almost incomprehensible. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You could have anyone? Why would you want to spend time with someone like me?" Gabriel reached across the table and gently took her hand. "Because someone like you is exactly what's been missing from my life." Before Victoria could respond, the bell above the door chimed again, and Emma Morrison, the cafe owner, walked in from her afternoon errands. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair, Emma had been like a second mother to Victoria since she started working at the cafe. "Victoria, dear," Emma called out, then stopped short when she noticed Gabriel. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were with a customer, Emma. This is Gabriel," Victoria said, standing quickly. "Gabriel, this is Emma Morrison. She owns the cafe." Gabriel rose and extended his hand with a warm smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Morrison. Victoria speaks very highly of you." Emma shook his hand, her experienced eyes taking in his expensive clothes and confident demeanor. "Any friend of Victoria's is welcome here," she said graciously. "I hope you're enjoying our coffee." "It's excellent," Gabriel replied genuinely. "And the atmosphere is wonderful. We've created something special here." As Emma bustled behind the counter to check on things, Gabriel turned back to Victoria. "I should let you get back to work," he said reluctantly. "Actually," Victoria said, surprising herself with her boldness, "my shift ends in 2 hours. If you really want to see my art, you could come by then." Gabriel's face lit up. "I'd like that very much." They exchanged phone numbers, and Gabriel, left with a promise to return later, Victoria watched him go, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. She had just invited Gabriel Whitmore to her tiny apartment to look at her amateur paintings. The idea seemed insane, but something about his genuine interest made her want to take the risk. 2 hours later, Victoria stood in front of her apartment building, fidgeting with her keys as she waited for Gabriel's car to arrive. The building was old, but well-maintained, in a neighborhood that was safe but clearly working class. When a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb, Victoria felt a fresh wave of anxiety about the differences in there. Circumstances. Gabriel emerged from the car and looked up at the building with interest rather than judgment. "This is a great neighborhood," he said as he approached, "full of character." Victoria led him up 3 flights of stairs to her small one-bedroom apartment, apologizing in advance for the cramped space. But when Gabriel stepped inside, his attention was immediately captured by the artwork covering almost every wall. "Victoria," he breathed, moving closer to examine a portrait of an elderly man with weathered hands and kind eyes. "This is extraordinary." The painting was of her father, captured during one of his rare quiet moments reading the newspaper. Victoria had managed to convey not just his physical appearance, but his gentleness, his strength, the weight of responsibility he carried for his family. You really think so? Victoria asked nervously, watching Gabriel's face as he studied her work. I think you're incredibly talented, Gabriel said, moving to examine another piece. This one showed her mother before the illness, laughing at something. Off canvas, her face radiant with joy. The emotion you capture, the depth, it's remarkable. Gabriel spent the next hour examining every piece Victoria had displayed, asking questions about her techniques, her inspirations, her process. His interest was clearly genuine, and Victoria found herself relaxing, talking about her art with an enthusiasm she hadn't felt in months. You should be showing these, Gabriel said finally, turning to face her. People need to see your work. Victoria shook her head. I'm not ready for that. These are just personal pieces, practice work. Victoria, I've been to countless gallery openings, and I've never seen anything that moved me the way your paintings do. You have a gift. The conviction in his voice made Victoria's chest tight with emotion. She had dreamed of hearing words like these from someone who understood art, but she had never imagined they would come from someone like Gabriel. I can't afford to show right now, she said practically. Gallery fees, framing, promotion, it all costs money I don't have. Gabriel was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking, what if I told you I knew someone who might be interested in your work? Someone who could help you get started without upfront costs? Victoria looked at him suspiciously. You're not talking about charity. I'm talking about investment, Gabriel said firmly. There's a difference. Before Victoria could respond, her phone rang. Caller ID showed her father's number, and she answered quickly, knowing he wouldn't call during his work hours unless something was wrong. Dad, Victoria, honey, you need to come to the hospital. Your mother's had another episode. The color drained from Victoria's face, and Gabriel immediately moved closer, his hand touching her arm in support. I'll be right there, Victoria said, ending the call with shaking hands. What's wrong? Gabriel asked gently. My mother, Victoria said, grabbing her purse and jacket. She's in the hospital. I'll drive you, Gabriel said without hesitation. Victoria started to protest, but Gabriel was already holding the door open for her. Let me help, he said simply. The drive to the hospital passed in tense silence, Victoria's anxiety growing with each passing minute. Gabriel navigated the traffic with calm efficiency, occasionally glancing over to check on her. When they arrived, he parked and started to get out of the car. You don't have to come in, Victoria said quickly. This isn't your problem. Gabriel took her hand, squeezing gently. Victoria, anything that affects you affects me now. Let me be here for you. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that took Victoria's breath away. She had been carrying her family's burdens alone for so long that the offer of support felt foreign and overwhelming inside the hospital. They found Victoria's father, Robert, sitting in the waiting area with his head in his hands. He was a big man, made smaller by worry and exhaustion. When he looked up and saw Victoria, relief flooded his weathered features. She's stable now, Robert said, standing to embrace his daughter. The doctors are running tests, but they think it's just the stress of the new medication. Victoria introduced Gabriel to her father, watching as the two men shook hands. Robert Sterling was clearly surprised by Gabriel's presence, but his innate politeness prevented him from asking questions. There anything I can do? Gabriel asked quietly. Robert looked at this well-dressed stranger, who had apparently driven his daughter to the hospital, and shook his head. We're used to handling these things, but thank you for asking. When Victoria was finally allowed to see her mother, Gabriel waited in the hallway with her father. The two men sat in comfortable silence for several minutes before Robert spoke. You care about my daughter? It wasn't a question, and Gabriel answered honestly. Yes, I do. She's been carrying too much weight for someone her age, Robert said quietly. Always putting everyone else first. She's remarkable, Gabriel replied, meaning it completely. Robert studied Gabriel's profile, taking in the expensive clothes and confident bearing. You're not from around here, no, Gabriel admitted. But that doesn't change how I feel about Victoria. When Victoria emerged from her mother's room an hour later, her eyes were red from crying, but she looked relieved. She's going to be okay, she told them. The doctors want to keep her overnight for observation, but she's responding well to treatment. Gabriel drove Victoria and her father home, listening as they discussed the financial implications of another hospital stay. The medical bills were clearly a constant source of stress for the family, and Gabriel found himself wanting to solve their problems, even though he knew Victoria would never accept direct help. "Thank you for today," Victoria said as Gabriel walked her to her apartment building. "You didn't have to stay, but it meant everything to have you there." "Where else would I be?" Gabriel asked, cupping her face gently in his hands. "Victoria, I meant what I said earlier. Anything that affects you affects me now." Standing there in the soft glow of the streetlight, Victoria felt something shift inside her chest. This man, who could have anyone and anything he wanted, was choosing to be here with her, supporting her through her family's crisis. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. "Gabriel," she whispered, not sure what she wanted to say. He leaned down and kissed her softly, a gentle pressure that spoke of tenderness rather than passion. When they broke apart, Victoria felt as if the world had tilted on its axis. "I'll call you tomorrow," Gabriel said, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Get some rest." As Victoria watched him drive away, she touched her lips where his kiss still lingered. In the span of 24 hours, her entire world had changed. Gabriel Whitmore had awakened something in her that she had thought was buried beneath responsibility and exhaustion. Hope the next morning brought a call from Diana Chen, asking Victoria to meet her for lunch. Victoria almost declined, uncertain about meeting one of Gabriel's friends, but something in Diana's voice convinced her to agree. Diana had chosen a quiet restaurant in Victoria's neighborhood, and when Victoria arrived, she found Gabriel's business partner waiting with 2 cups of coffee and a warm smile. "Thank you for coming," Diana said as Victoria sat down. "I wanted a chance to talk with you without Gabriel hovering." Victoria felt her defenses rise. "If this is about me not being suitable for someone like Gabriel, it's actually the opposite," Diana interrupted gently. "I've known Gabriel for over 10 years, and I've never seen him the way he was yesterday after he met you. You've awakened something in him that I wasn't sure still existed." Victoria stared at her, unsure how to respond. "Gabriel is one of the best people I know," Diana continued, "but his world can be complicated. There will be people who question your relationship, who assume you're after his money, who try to make you feel like you don't belong." "Maybe I don't," Victoria said quietly. "That's where you're wrong," Diana said firmly. "Gabriel needs someone real in his life, someone who sees him for who he is rather than what he can provide. From what I observed last night, that's exactly what you do." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't know how to navigate his world." "You don't have to navigate it," Diana replied. "You just have to be yourself." That's what he fell for. As their lunch progressed, Victoria found herself warming to Diana's genuine kindness. By the time they parted ways, Victoria felt she had gained not just insight into Gabriel's world, but potentially a real friend. That evening, Gabriel called to check on Victoria's mother and to ask if he could take Victoria to dinner the following night. When she hesitated, he quickly suggested a small restaurant in her neighborhood rather than somewhere intimidating and expensive. "I want to know everything about you," Gabriel said over dinner the next evening. "Your dreams, your fears. What makes you laugh?" Victoria found herself opening up in ways she hadn't in years, sharing stories from her childhood, her hopes for her art, her love for her parents. Gabriel listened with complete attention, asking thoughtful questions and sharing stories of his own. "I built my company because I wanted to prove something," Gabriel admitted as they walked along the quiet street after dinner. "But success turned out to be lonelier than I expected." "What about relationships?" Victoria asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. Gabriel was quiet for a moment. "I've dated, but it always felt transactional. People wanted to be seen with me, or they wanted access to my world, or they wanted financial security. No one seemed interested in just me." Victoria stopped walking and turned to face him. "I don't want any of those things from you." "I know," Gabriel said softly, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "That's why I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Victoria felt her heart race as she looked into his eyes and saw the truth there. "Gabriel," she whispered, not sure if she was ready for the intensity of what was building between them. "I know it's fast," he said quickly. I know we've only known each other for a few days, but I've never felt anything like this before. Victoria stood on her tiptoes and kissed him, pouring all of her confusion and hope and growing feelings into the contact. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Scared, she admitted against his lips. "So am I," Gabriel replied, pulling her closer. "But I think this is worth being scared about." Over the following weeks, Gabriel became a constant presence in Victoria's life. He showed up at the cafe during her breaks, drove her to the hospital, to visit her mother, and spent hours in her tiny apartment talking about art and dreams and the future. Victoria found herself falling deeper in love with him each day, not because of his wealth or status, but because of his kindness, his intelligence, and the way he made her feel like the most important person in the world. The awakening was complete. Both Gabriel and Victoria had discovered something they hadn't known they were looking for. A love that transcended circumstances, connection that promised to change both of their lives forever. 3 months after their first meeting, Victoria stood in the center of the Meridian Gallery, surrounded by her paintings displayed under professional lighting for the first time. The elegant space buzzed with conversation, as art collectors, critics, and enthusiasts moved from piece to piece, discussing her work with the kind of serious attention she had only dreamed of receiving. Gabriel had been true to his word about knowing someone in the art world. Through Diana's connections, he had arranged for Victoria to meet with Catherine Meridian, a respected gallery owner known for discovering emerging talent. Catherine had been immediately impressed by Victoria's portfolio and had offered her a solo show with no upfront costs, taking only a commission on sales. "I can't believe this is really happening," Victoria whispered to Gabriel, as they watched a well-dressed couple examine her portrait of her father with obvious interest. Gabriel squeezed her hand gently. "You did this, Victoria? Your talent? Your hard work? I just helped open a door." The opening night had exceeded everyone's expectations. Nearly half of Victoria's pieces had sold within the first 2 hours, providing her with more money than she had made in the previous year of working multiple jobs. More importantly, she had received validation from respected members of the art community who praised her ability to capture human emotion with remarkable depth and authenticity. "Miss Sterling?" A distinguished older man approached them, extending his hand. "I'm James Hamilton from the Arts Council. Your work is extraordinary. I'd like to discuss a possible commission." As Victoria spoke with potential clients and collectors, Gabriel stepped back to observe the woman he had fallen in love with, in her element. She was radiant, confident in a way he had never seen before, discussing her artistic process with passion and intelligence. This was Victoria as she was meant to be, not exhausted and overworked, but vibrant and fulfilled. Diana joined Gabriel at the edge of the crowd, following his gaze to Victoria. "She's incredible," Diana said quietly. "You both look happier than I've ever seen you." "She's changed everything for me," Gabriel replied, his voice filled with wonder. "I used to think success was about building something that would last.
Ow.
I realize it's about building something with someone who matters." Their moment of quiet observation was interrupted by the arrival of Gabriel's parents, Richard and Margaret Whitmore. Gabriel tensed as he saw them enter the gallery, their expressions carefully neutral as they surveyed the crowd. He had invited them hoping they would see what he saw in Victoria, but their presence made him nervous. Richard Whitmore was a tall, imposing man who had built his own fortune in real estate before passing the family business to Gabriel's younger brother. Margaret was elegantly dressed and perfectly composed, the kind of woman who had been raised to navigate high society with grace and subtle authority. "Gabriel," his mother said, kissing his cheek in greeting. "This is quite an event, Mother." "Father, I'm glad you could come," Gabriel replied, though his voice carried a tension that Diana immediately noticed. Victoria, having finished her conversation with the potential client, approached their group with a bright smile that faltered slightly when Gabriel introduced his parents. She had known this moment would come eventually, but she still felt unprepared for the scrutiny of people who moved in Gabriel's rarefied world. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore," Victoria said, extending her hand with as much confidence as she could muster. "Thank you for coming to my show." Margaret Whitmore shook Victoria's hand with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The gallery is lovely, dear, and your paintings are quite colorful." The faint condescension in her tone wasn't lost on anyone in the group. Gabriel's jaw tightened, but Victoria maintained her composure, having learned to deal with subtle dismissals during her years of service work. I hope you'll take a moment to look at some of the pieces, Victoria said graciously. Art can be very personal, so I understand it doesn't speak to everyone in the same way. Richard Whitmore studied a nearby portrait of Victoria's mother with more genuine interest than his wife had shown. It's quite good, he said, surprising everyone. There's real skill here. Thank you, Victoria replied, her relief evident. That's my mother. She's beautiful, Richard said, noting the love and admiration Victoria had captured in every brushstroke. You can see how much she means to you. As Gabriel's parents moved through the gallery, Victoria tried to focus on other guests, but she was acutely aware of their presence and their occasional glances in her direction. She knew they were evaluating her, trying to determine if she was suitable for their son. And the knowledge made her stomach clench with anxiety. The evening continued successfully. With several more sales and numerous inquiries about future work, Catherine Meridian was thrilled with the response, already discussing the possibility of representing Victoria long-term. As the crowd began to thin, Victoria finally allowed herself to believe that the night had been a genuine triumph. Gabriel found her near the end of the evening, standing in front of her unsold portrait of herself that she had painted during a moment of rare quiet reflection. In it, she had captured her own weariness and determination. The complex emotions of someone carrying heavy burdens while still holding on to hope. This one's my favorite, Gabriel said softly, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. It's not very flattering, Victoria replied, leaning back against his chest. It's honest, Gabriel corrected. It shows your strength, your resilience. It shows the woman I fell in love with. Victoria turned in his arms, looking up at his face in the soft gallery lighting. Your parents don't approve of me. Gabriel's expression grew serious. My parents don't know you yet. When they do, they'll see what I see. And if they don't? Gabriel cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle, but his voice firm. Then that's their loss. Victoria, I love you. Not who my parents think I should love, not who would look good in society photographs, not who would advance my career. I love you. Before Victoria could respond, Catherine Meridian approached with a bottle of champagne in 3 glasses. I wanted to toast our successful artist, she said, beaming as she poured the champagne. Victoria, this is just the beginning. I have collectors asking about your next pieces. As they celebrated Victoria's success, Gabriel felt a profound sense of rightness. This was how love should feel, he realized. Not strategic or calculated, but natural and inevitable. Victoria had brought color and authenticity into his previously monochrome world, and he couldn't imagine going back to the way things had been before. The following weeks brought new challenges as their relationship became more public. Gabriel's social circle was small and tightly knit, and news of his involvement with a local artist spread quickly through the city's elite circles. Some people were genuinely happy for Gabriel, having watched him struggle with loneliness despite his success. Others were less supportive, questioning Victoria's motives and Gabriel's judgment. The first real test came at a charity board meeting where Gabriel served as a major donor. Victoria accompanied him, having been invited to discuss a potential arts education program for underprivileged children. She had prepared thoroughly, researching similar programs and developing a comprehensive proposal. But she still felt the weight of judgment from some of the other board members. Miss Sterling, said Patricia Vanderberg, the board chairman and one of the city's most influential socialites, this program you're proposing would require significant funding. What makes you think art education is a priority for these children? Victoria felt the subtle challenge in the question but responded calmly, art gives children a way to express themselves when they might not have words for their experiences. It builds confidence, teaches problem-solving skills, and provides an outlet for emotions that might otherwise manifest in destructive ways. That's a lovely sentiment, Patricia replied with a condescending smile, but we need to be practical. About resource allocation. Gabriel started to intervene, but Victoria continued, her voice gaining strength. I grew up in a working-class family, Mrs. Vanderberg. I know what it's like to feel invisible, to believe that dreams are luxuries you can't afford. Art changed that for me. It gave me a voice, a purpose, a way to see beauty even in difficult circumstances. Every child deserves that opportunity. The passion in Victoria's voice and the authenticity of her experience seemed to resonate with several board members. By the end of the meeting, the arts program had been approved for a trial period, with Victoria serving as the coordinator. As they left the building, Gabriel pulled Victoria into a quiet alcove and kissed her deeply. "That was incredible," he said against her lips. "You were incredible." "I was terrified," Victoria admitted, her heart still racing from the confrontation. "You didn't show it," Gabriel replied, his admiration evident. "You stood up for what you believed in, and you won them over with your passion and authenticity." However, not all of Gabriel's social obligations went as smoothly. At a formal dinner party hosted by one of his business associates, Victoria overheard a group of women discussing her relationship with Gabriel in what they thought was private conversation. "She's pretty enough, I suppose," one woman said. "But, really, what could Gabriel possibly have in common with a waitress?" "I heard she was practically homeless when they met," another added. "Living in some awful little apartment, working 3 jobs. It's obvious what she's after." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could decide how to respond, Diana appeared at her side. "Ladies," Diana said with a bright smile that didn't hide the steel in her voice, "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. I think you should know that Victoria is one of the most talented artists I've ever encountered. And she's shown more grace and dignity in the past 5 minutes than I've seen from this group all evening." The women looked embarrassed, mumbling apologies before dispersing. Diana turned to Victoria with concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm getting used to it," Victoria said, though her voice shook slightly. "People are going to make assumptions. People are going to be jealous," Diana corrected. "Gabriel is one of the most eligible men in the city, and you won him without even trying. That threatens women who have been scheming for his attention for years." Despite Diana's support and Gabriel's unwavering devotion, the constant scrutiny began to wear on Victoria. She started declining invitations to high-profile events, preferring to spend time with Gabriel in quieter settings where they could just be themselves. Gabriel noticed her withdrawal and finally confronted her about it one evening as they walked through the park near her apartment. "You've been pulling away," he said gently, taking her hand as they sat on a bench overlooking the pond.
Talk to
"Me." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, watching ducks glide across the water's surface. "Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in your world," she said finally. "The constant judgment, the assumption that I'm using you, the way people look at me like I don't belong." Gabriel felt his heart clench at the pain in her voice. "Victoria, you belong wherever you choose to be. Anyone who can't see your worth isn't worth your time. But they're your friends, your business associates," Victoria replied. "I don't want to make your life more difficult." Gabriel turned to face her fully, his hands framing her face. "Make my life better in every possible way. Before I met you, I was successful but empty. You brought meaning to everything I do." "What if it's not enough?" Victoria whispered, voicing the fear that had been growing inside her. "What if the differences between our worlds are too much to overcome?" Gabriel was quiet for a moment, understanding that this was a crucial point in their relationship. Victoria needed reassurance, but more than that, she needed to know that he was committed to building a life with her, not just fitting her into his existing world. "Marry me," he said suddenly, the words surprising them both. Victoria's eyes widened. In shock. Gabriel ... "I know it's sudden," he said quickly, "but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I don't want to spend another day wondering if you're going to decide we're too different. I want to build something new with you, something that belongs to both of us." Victoria stared at him, her heart racing. "You're proposing to me on a park bench?" Gabriel laughed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Would you prefer the Ritz?" "I prefer to know you mean it," Victoria said softly. Gabriel stood up, and, to her amazement, dropped to one knee, right there on the path. Several passersby stopped to watch, but Gabriel's attention was focused entirely on Victoria. "Victoria Sterling," he said, his voice carrying complete conviction. "You are the strongest, most genuine, most beautiful person I have ever known. You make me want to be better than I am. You make me believe in things I had given up on. Will you marry me?" Victoria felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked at this incredible man kneeling before her, offering her not just his love, but his entire future. All around them, strangers had begun to applaud, sensing the significance of the moment. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." Gabriel stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as their audience cheered. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that left them both breathless. "I don't have a ring," he said, suddenly realizing the oversight. Victoria laughed through her tears. I don't need a ring to know how I feel about you." "Well, you're getting one anyway," Gabriel said, grinning. "Something worthy of the woman who changed my entire world." The next few months were a whirlwind of wedding planning, with Margaret Whitmore insisting on helping despite her initial reservations about Victoria. She got to know her future daughter-in-law better. Margaret began to see the qualities that had captured her son's heart. Victoria's genuine kindness, her devotion to her family, and her lack of pretension gradually won over Gabriel's mother. The wedding itself was a perfect blend of both their worlds. Held in the garden of the Whitmore family estate, the ceremony was elegant but not ostentatious, with Victoria's vibrant paintings displayed throughout the reception space, alongside the formal flower arrangements. Her father walked her down the aisle in a simple but stunning dress that she had chosen herself. While Gabriel waited at the altar with tears in his eyes, Victoria's mother, Helen, had recovered enough to attend the ceremony, and her presence made the day complete for Victoria. As they exchanged vows they had written themselves, both Gabriel and Victoria spoke about finding unexpected love, about the way their different backgrounds had enriched rather than divided them, about building a future based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. "You taught me that love isn't about finding someone who fits into your life," Gabriel said, his voice carrying across the assembled guests, "but about creating a new life together that's better than anything either of us could have imagined alone." Victoria's vows brought tears to many eyes as she spoke about Gabriel's unwavering support of her dreams and his ability to see her potential, even when she couldn't see it herself. "You didn't try to change me or make me into someone else," she said, her voice strong and clear. "You loved me exactly as I was, and that love gave me the courage to become who I was meant to be." The reception was a celebration that brought together people from every part of their lives. Victoria's artist friends mingled with Gabriel's business associates, while Emma from the cafe chatted with Diana about their shared affection for the couple. The barriers that had once seemed so insurmountable dissolved in the warmth of genuine celebration. During their first dance, Gabriel whispered in Victoria's ear, "No regrets." "Only that we didn't meet sooner," Victoria replied, her face glowing with happiness. Their honeymoon was spent in a small villa in Tuscany, where Victoria painted the rolling landscapes while Gabriel read and relaxed in a way he hadn't in years. For 2 weeks, they existed in a bubble of contentment, talking for hours about their dreams for the future and making love with a passion that seemed to grow stronger each day. When they returned to the city, it was to a new home that Gabriel had surprised Victoria with during their engagement. Instead of his stark downtown penthouse or a mansion in the exclusive hills, he had chosen a beautiful brownstone in Victoria's neighborhood, close to her parents and the cafe where they had really gotten to know each other. The house had large windows perfect for a studio, and Gabriel had converted the entire top floor into a professional art space for Victoria. "You didn't have to do this," Victoria said as she explored the studio, running her hands over the easels and professional lighting he had installed. "I wanted you to have everything you needed to pursue your art without compromise," Gabriel replied, watching her face light up as she discovered each thoughtful detail. Victoria's career flourished in the months following their wedding. Her second show sold out completely, and she began receiving commissions from collectors across the country. More importantly, the arts education program she had developed for underprivileged children became a model for similar programs in other cities. Victoria found deep fulfillment in teaching young people to find their voices through art, just as she had found hers. Gabriel, meanwhile, discovered that having Victoria in his life gave new meaning to his business success. He began directing more of Whitmore Industries' resources toward philanthropic efforts, particularly those supporting education and the arts. Working alongside Victoria on various charitable projects brought them even closer together and gave Gabriel a sense of purpose that pure profit had never provided. One evening, as they sat in their garden watching the sunset, Victoria rested her head on Gabriel's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "What are you thinking about?" Gabriel asked, stroking her hair. "Just how different everything is from a year ago," Victoria replied. "I was so tired then, so focused on just surviving each day. I never imagined I could be this happy." Gabriel kissed the top of her head, remembering the exhausted young woman who had collapsed in his arms at the charity gala. "You saved me too, you know. I was successful, but I was hollow inside. You gave my life color and meaning. We saved each other," Victoria corrected, turning to look at him with eyes full of love. A year later, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. The news filled both of them with joy and anticipation as they prepared to add another member to their family. Gabriel proved to be as devoted and protective during Victoria's pregnancy as he had been during their courtship, assuring she had everything she needed while still respecting her independence and strength. Their daughter, Grace Helen Whitmore, was born on a snowy December morning, with Victoria's mother's middle name, honoring the woman who had taught Victoria about resilience and love. Gabriel held his daughter for the first time with tears streaming down his face, amazed by the perfect little person they had created together. "She's beautiful," he whispered, studying Grace's tiny features. "She has your eyes," Victoria, exhausted, but radiant, watched her husband cradle their daughter with infinite tenderness. "She's going to be loved so much," she said softly. As Grace grew, she became the center of their world without overwhelming it. Victoria continued her art career, often painting with Grace nearby an especially designed playpen in the studio. Gabriel reduced his travel schedule to spend more time with his family, discovering that fatherhood brought him even greater joy than he had expected. The Whitmore family became a fixture in their neighborhood, with Gabriel often seen pushing Grace's stroller to the cafe where he and Victoria had fallen in love, or playing with her in the local park where he had proposed. Their love story had become legendary among their friends, a testament to the power of genuine connection to transcend social barriers. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Gabriel and Victoria returned to the grand ballroom where they had first met. The charity gala was being held again, and this time Victoria attended as Gabriel's wife, and as one of the event's featured artists, with several of her pieces being auctioned for the hospital's benefit. "Do you ever think about that night?" Gabriel asked as they danced to the same orchestra that had played during their first meeting. "Every day," Victoria replied, her wedding ring catching the light from the chandeliers. "I think about how close we came to never meeting at all. If I hadn't been working that event, if you hadn't intervened when I spilled that wine, if I hadn't fainted in your arms." "Fate," Gabriel said with conviction. "It was always supposed to happen." Victoria smiled, remembering the frightened, exhausted young woman she had been that night. "I was so different then. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter to anyone outside. My family." "You were never invisible to me," Gabriel said, spinning her gently in his arms. "From the moment I saw you, you were the only person in the room." As the evening progressed, they watched other couples dancing, some clearly in the early stages of romance, others celebrating decades together. Victoria thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, all the challenges they had overcome and the love that had grown stronger with each passing day. Later that night, as they tucked 5-year-old Grace into her bed, she looked up at them with the serious expression she wore when asking important questions. "Mommy, Daddy, tell me again how you met," Grace requested. As she did almost every night, Victoria and Gabriel exchanged amused glances before Victoria began the familiar story. "Sweetheart, Daddy was at a fancy party and Mommy was working. They're carrying drinks for all the important people. And Mommy spilled wine on someone," Grace added excitedly, knowing the story by heart. "That's right," Gabriel continued, settling into his chair beside Grace's bed. "And when I saw how sorry Mommy was and how hard she was working, I knew she was someone special. And then Mommy fell down," Grace said, giggling at what she considered the most exciting part of the story. "Mommy was very tired from working?" "So hard," Victoria explained. "But Daddy caught her and made sure she was safe, because Daddy loved Mommy right away." Grace concluded with the confidence of a child who had heard this story countless times. "Because Daddy recognized something in Mommy that he had been looking for his whole life," Gabriel corrected gently, looking at Victoria with the same love and wonder he had felt that first night. After Grace fell asleep, Victoria and Gabriel sat on their bedroom balcony, looking out over the city lights. Victoria's latest painting, a family portrait showing the three of them in their garden, stood on an easel nearby, nearly finished. "Do you think Grace will understand someday how lucky we are?" Victoria asked, curled up against Gabriel's side. "Think she'll understand that love isn't about luck," Gabriel replied thoughtfully. "It's about recognizing something real when you find it and being brave enough to fight for it." Victoria nodded, thinking about all the obstacles they had overcome together. The social pressures, the family doubts, the financial struggles, and the simple challenge of merging two very different lives into one harmonious whole. None of it had been easy, but all of it had been worth it. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying the weight of everything they had built together. "I love you too," Gabriel replied, kissing her forehead. "Thank you for falling into my arms that night." Victoria laughed softly. "Thank you for catching me." As they sat together in comfortable silence, both reflected on the miraculous chain of events that had brought them together. A charity gala, a spilled glass of wine, a moment of exhaustion that had led to a lifetime of love. Their story had become proof that sometimes the most beautiful things in life happen when you least expect them. And that true love really can conquer the differences that seem insurmountable from the outside. The woman who had once felt invisible had found someone who saw her completely. And the man who had everything had discovered that what he really needed was someone who loved him for who he was beneath all the success and wealth. Together, they had created something beautiful, a marriage based on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and a love that grew stronger with each passing day. Years later, when people would ask them for the secret to their happiness, Gabriel and Victoria would always give the same answer: they had saved each other. Not from their circumstances, but from the loneliness and emptiness that comes from never being truly seen and loved, or who you really are. Their love story had begun with a collision, but it had become a union that would last for the rest of their lives. A testament to the transformative power of finding your perfect match in the most unexpected place and time. And every night, as they fell asleep in each other's arms, they were grateful for the moment when Victoria Sterling passed out in Gabriel Whitmore's embrace, and two hearts collided to create a love that would endure forever. The end.